perpetuating environmental injustice.
This is a question that goes back to you personally a little bit, because I was really struck that you've had a prior career in the peace movement, and I'd like you to talk about the connection within yourself between doing that kind of work and the kind of work that you do now.
I have always said that my fundamental motivation for the work that I do within the environmental movement is social justice. And I say that because I come from a history of social justice work. Even as a very early in my life, my father was a very active in his union and talked a lot about the economic justice that needed to happen in his workplace. My oldest brother was a conscientious objector during the Vietnam War, and actually filed as a conscientious objector while he was in Air Force intelligence. So it's been fundamental in my family. My personal history is that, throughout college and graduate school, I was involved in social justice movements. And while I was a graduate student at the University of Michigan, this is sort of how I ended up back in Ann Arbor and in Michigan after having moved away after I finished graduate school. Is I was very involved in the peace movement during the first Gulf War in 1990-91. And myself and another physics graduate student investigated military research on the campus of the University of Michigan and exposed a number of military research projects that actually compromised the university's own rules about accepting those contracts from the military. So when Time and Newsweek were talking about the Iraqi regime of Saddam Hussein having fuel-air explosives, I was one of a group of people who basically exposed that the University of Michigan was doing research on the next generation of fuel-air explosives that were actually used as the bunker busters in Afghanistan when the United States went into Afghanistan shortly after 9/11. I continued to do that for about 4 years of exposing military contract after military contract that was contrary to the university's own rules. As a graduate student, I was part of a protest that within the physics department, many of the graduate students complained that the only jobs they could get was with the defense industry. And so we staged a protest where a recruiter was coming from Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, which is one of the national laboratories that designs and tests the nuclear weapons of the United States. And we basically organized a bunch of graduate students to sign up for interviews and then proceeded to go into the interview and grill the interviewer about the in part the pollution that they had generated both in Nevada and around Lawrence Livermore, plutonium contamination, and to the point where when I was about the third person who came in and started asking these questions, the interviewer got up and walked out. But it really, it made the point with the university, with the physics department that, it's like, hey, we want something more than just the option of having to work for the Department of Defense, whether directly or indirectly. And that our work can contribute to a positive role in this world. I'm not a Luddite. I believe that science and technology can be used for positive things, but because we have, especially in the United States, an attitude of domination and control that we use our resources for terrible things. The first Gulf War was one of the worst in terms of environmental contamination. So, you know, environmental devastation and war are directly connected with one another. I've continued to do research and make presentations about the use of depleted uranium and the environmental and health consequences of that. I believe eventually that depleted uranium will be banned for use in weapons, but it's going to take a while before the United States recognizes that. I mean, the country of Iraq now is, I mean, in the first Gulf War, it was mostly used outside of urban areas. But the number of depleted uranium rounds that have been used in the Iraq War in urban areas has been tremendous during this current war and occupation. And the contamination of those areas is going to be horrific in terms of the future health consequences for the people of Iraq.
We're at the end of this tape.